We've all seen it. Lavish displays of affection are all over social media right now. It's very common to see these grand romantic gestures, but could this behavior actually be considered love bombing? How can you tell if these intense displays of love are genuine or if they're designed to gain power over you? This is Unsilenced, a JBWS podcast where we have real conversations about abuse. I'm MC Robinson, and today I'm speaking with
Danielle Graddick. I am a clinical and forensic psychologist, and I have a private practice here in New Jersey. And I have been a board member with JBWS since 2023. And I'm the chair of the communications committee.
Dr. Graddick is going to explore the signs of love bombing, the difference between naturally passionate people and those who are using love bombing, and how love bombing intersects with abusive relationships. But before you listen, please take a moment to subscribe to Unsilenced wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps us to break the silence around domestic violence. So let's talk about love bombing. And just by nature of being on the internet, I feel like this is a term that you see a lot, and sometimes it's not always used correctly. So it seems like people just tend to have vastly different notions of what love bombing is. Um,
Yes.
so if you don't mind, can you just kind of quickly define what that might look like or what love bombing is, first of all?
So, love bombing is characterized by a pattern of these kind of over the top displays of affection or attention, typically at the beginning stages of a relationship, with the goal of gaining power and control over someone, but more specifically, creating the sense of emotional dependency with someone. So, another kind of quick thing I like to say too is love bombing has these sort of components in it, like intent, speed, and intensity. So typically it happens really fast. Within the first few weeks, there might be an I love you or these lavish gifts. Typically it is really intense and doesn't is not necessarily proportionate to the amount of time that you've known each other. And then the final thing I'd say is it's about intent. So most of the time, and probably most of what we'll be talking about is when people do it in a manipulative way, but it's not always done manipulatively. Sometimes it's done unconsciously. So that's kind of how I would define love bombing.
I love everything that you just said because it is everything that we're going to get into. But, I think the first thing that comes to mind is people thinking, oh, well, I mean, an intense and excessive interest, like that sounds so nice if somebody loves me like that. Like that's so wonderful. And I really think it would be helpful to break down, like, why is it a problem if it's used in a controlling way?
Love bombing, when used manipulatively and in a controlling way, is a problem because it creates this false narrative unknowingly for the recipient of all the attention and all the affection. So someone might be going in and truly things do feel like a fairy tale, just like it happens in the movies. He or she, they're so excited about me, it's we're vibing, we're getting gifts. They want me to meet the parents. They're taking me on these trips. When the goal really is creating this sense of, I gotcha, now we're locked in. So when it's used as a tool to control you and as a tool to manipulate you, then it starts to feel dicey. And that's when it becomes really problematic and really scary for the other person that's involved.
Yeah, and I also think it would be helpful if we looked at how love bombing affects the person that's experiencing it. Like, what does it make them feel that maybe makes them more, maybe I would say, primed to be controlled later on? What is it, the effect it produces?
Yeah, so I could answer that question in two ways. The first way I would answer it is it literally has an impact on the brain. We experience these kind of surges of like dopamine and all the feel-good chemicals. So our brain and our feelings are rushing because we're getting all of this attention, all of this love, all of this affection up front. The other way I'd kind of explain how it feels is it starts off in this like honeymoon, or they call it an idealization phase, where that's all the feel good stuff. That's all the dates and all the things that you see on social media or in the media that kind of lock people in. So once you're locked in, you think you're committed. You think this person, everything this person is saying is real. You think it's authentic. Phase two of that is called the devaluation phase. So that's when you start to experience little cracks in the surface. So perhaps the person that's love bombing you starts being hot and cold. Perhaps they're not as consistent as they were before. They start to be critical of you and criticize you or use things that you said before against you, or they start withdrawing altogether. So that's what it can make someone feel like, wait a minute, I thought we were in this fairy tale and now the script is completely changed.
Ooh.
So it can be really frightening and really destabilizing.
Absolutely. And I also wonder how, I don't know if the right word is effective, but like if somebody's using abuse in their relationship, how, why do they kind of default to love bombing? Because if you think about it, one of the key signs of like an unhealthy relationship in the early stages is what you pointed out, the speed, the intensity. You know, it's 3 weeks in and they love you. So like, how is that like a tool that people who are using abuse rely on? Like, why is it so effective?
I think the true answer to that is people really want to be loved. And a lot of us come from homes or situations or childhoods or communities where that love may have been inconsistent, or it was conditional. So I think if we really like strip the core of it all, love feels good and attention feels good and affection feels good. So I think people that use abuse, that engage in these love bombing tactics, they kind of prey on that. They themselves may have experienced some kind of trauma or some kind of destabilizing situation where this feels like the right thing to do, or it feels like the thing they'll know will win someone over. And then to the person experiencing it, it's all they ever wanted, and that person may just struggle with kind of detecting the signs of when this starts to feel unhealthy and how to really detect what's going on underneath the surface.
Yeah, and if you listen to a lot of people who have experienced abuse, a lot of times it does start out, and obviously not always, but a lot of times it does start out with, you know, they were perfect. It felt like a fairy tale. I'd never been loved so deeply. And I remember speaking to a survivor who experienced this a little later in life, feeling like, oh, finally, now I know now I know what love really means. And it was so confusing for her to encounter that at a later stage in life. So I think it's also important. Can love bombing happen at any point? Is it something that only young people experience, or could it happen throughout your life?
Oh, that's such a great question. It can absolutely happen at any phase of your life. I mean, we want to be loved when we're little children, like fresh out of the womb, and we want to be loved when we're older, and we're going through all these life transitions. So I do think it can happen at any point. I think it could happen to any gender. I think it could happen in any culture. It doesn't also have to be a romantic relationship, interestingly enough. It could also be a parent-child relationship where love bombing is used to kind of, especially in high conflict families, gain the affection of the child. So it can be used in lots and lots of different ways, actually, not just romantically and not just at the beginning of the relationship.
Yeah, because like it could also be, oh, that's actually a really good point because last week we did an episode on the cycle of violence where it's tension building, explosion, loving, and contrite. And I can't help but think like in the contrite loving phase is where maybe the person that's using abuse showers you with affection again. And so I wonder, does that play a role, do you think, also in they know like, oh, okay, if I get through this, then the love's gonna come back.
Yes, yes. I think absolutely. I think the cycle of it can be addictive and intoxicating. And remember what I said about the brain chemicals can also play on that. So once we're experiencing that love, obviously it feels good. Then you start to realize that it's flawed or it's wrong or it's painful, it's abusive. And then that person comes back and we experience those feel-good hormones again. So it just kind of comes rushing back. And then, so I think the cyclical nature of love bombing and of abuse makes it so much more difficult to kind of catch your breath and slow down and notice what it is, and also to safely exit.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's good to talk about this in general because I do feel, some people think, "Oh, love bombing, that's something juvenile. That happens when you're 16 or whatever." But really highlighting that anyone, I mean, this isn't something that it's very difficult to deny almost. It's not like it's something that's like, "Oh, this is off-putting." It's something that feels good because it's designed to feel good and make you feel good.
Exactly. If I can tell a quick story about myself, actually, I experienced a situation where I realized I was love bombed a couple of years ago. And a couple of years ago, I was still a whole psychologist who studies all of this for a living. But to make this story as concise as I can, I met this very charming young gentleman who was very, attractive and very complimentary of me, pursued me in the ways that I love to be pursued. Basically, we exchanged numbers, exchanged social media. At that point, no alarm bells had gone off. I went to bed, woke up the next morning. He had inundated my social media with comments, likes, hearts. Went in, and you know how stories can be archived into highlights on Instagram. Went through old stories and commented, "I love your face. You look so perfect. This looks like so much fun." And when I woke up, I was alarmed because I thought, "Oh my gosh, this feels intense." Like, first of all, how did you have the time to go through all of this and why? But there was a part of me that felt really nice. Like, who does go through my social media? I think I post things and it just exists out there. So, like, that basically hooked me in. And over time, I started to realize this is a really superficial kind of affection. Lots of compliments, lots of future faking, they call it, where, "Oh, I can't wait to take you to Paris. I can't wait to, meet your parents one day. I can't wait to do all this future stuff." But there were no actions behind it. There was not a singular date was planned. And when I started to kind of press him and ask for it or to set boundaries, I noticed that he would get like very hot and cold, and or he would withdraw and not answer for a couple of days. And ultimately I decided, after talking to my therapist and my friends, like, to cut it off. And afterwards I literally felt like I was withdrawing. I literally felt sick. And I felt like, oh my gosh, there was a part of me like, will he text me again? I kind of missed that. There's
Yeah.
a part of me that needed to check in with my friends and be like, did I do the right thing? And again, I studied this for a living. So it just, I say all this, and I'm being vulnerable to say it's really hard. And if you're at a period of your life where love feels good, and you really want to progress your life into the next stage, it could even be harder, especially for the millennials or the boomer or the older generation who really, really want that secure kind of stable love.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry that happened, but I do really appreciate you sharing that because you're also successful, highly educated, you're in the work, and you still can see how this can happen. And once again, I think it's helpful to break it down because it can happen because it's designed to happen because, we like that interest and we like, "Oh, wow, you're hearing you're so beautiful, you're so smart, you're this and that." And it's like, "Oh my gosh, like, it makes you feel really amazing." And so then I think, right, what happens is then if it's pulled back sometimes, then
Mm.
you're craving it. And so you're going to do anything you can to get that same level of interest and attraction and whatever. And then who has the control in that situation?
Exactly. Exactly. That's so well said. And it really, I know I keep mentioning substances, but it really does mirror like the cycle of substance use, with that high, that craving, that withdrawal, that dependence over time, just like the control that it has over you. It's quite intoxicating. And yeah, it's designed to be that way. You're exactly right.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I do think there are some people who are naturally effusive, complimentary, loving, like they kind of tend to show love in an over the top way. We've even talked about how some cultures like that's like normalized and standardized. So how can you differentiate when, "Oh, this is love bombing," versus, "Oh, this person is just very, very loving and wants to show this interest." What's the difference?
Yeah, that's such a fantastic question. I think a couple of things. I think the first thing I like to say is to watch the actions over time. I think over time people will tell on themselves and things will start to fall through the cracks. So sometimes when it feels confusing and you can't quite tell, wait and see. The other thing I'd say is slow down, slow yourself down and slow the other person down. If you set boundaries early on, or you make a need known, or you ask for something early on, oftentimes that's a great way to test someone to see if they're really invested or not. Because genuine love, genuine interest, it's cautious, it's patient, it listens to boundaries, it's respectful. Love bombing will fly right over that and will not meet your needs, and will withdraw, may withdraw if you ask for a need. So there are kind of some ways to test whether it's true or not. I think the best thing is to wait and see and to check in with yourself and talk to people. Talk to your friends, talk to a therapist. I have a friend that actually screenshotted their conversation with someone and put it into ChatGPT. And listen, I have lots of thoughts and concerns about ChatGPT, but ChatGPT said, "Ooh, this person feels a little controlling." So even if you need to resort to that, find some way to check outside of yourself to see if what you're experiencing feels off or not.
So interesting. I also think consistency, right, is a key.
Yes.
Because if like they're super loving and oh my God and blah blah blah, and then the next day they're really cold and they don't give you attention, or in the next month or whatever for periods of time. But if they're constantly showing up and showing the same amount of love and it's not used in like a way to get you to do something, is that also a way that you can kind of say like, okay, that's probably not love bombing?
Absolutely. I think consistency is key. And what the only thing I would add to that is consistency after a boundary has been set, or consistency after a disagreement has been had, because that's a great way to kind of test if someone is going to stick around and if someone is truly invested in getting to know you and building a healthy relationship. So absolutely.
I love that you said if they'll slow down too. Like, can you get them to slow down? Because that is also very telling, is if you express a boundary and then somebody keeps pushing and encroaching on that boundary, or if they're like, oh, like I didn't realize like this was uncomfortable for you, like I'll back off. I think that, does that tell you a lot about a person when how they respond to a boundary?
Yes, yes, for sure. I think people who engage in love bombing, a lot of them purposefully sort of speed through the boundaries, or they'll act like they didn't know they existed, or they'll withdraw and decide, I'm going to discard this, it's not worth it, because they drew a boundary. Again, people who just genuinely want love and affection and care and want a relationship will respect it, will ask you questions, will be able to take accountability for how their behavior may have made you feel. So I think setting boundaries is one of the best and hardest ways to test whether a relationship is healthy or not.
Why do you think it's also hard to set those?
Yeah, because I think sometimes, to the slowing down point, when we're caught up in a vibe and when we're caught up in the whirlwind of romance, it can be so scary. And sometimes even your intuition, even as a person who might be experiencing love bombing or experiencing abuse, you may not want to test out that theory. To our point earlier, it may feel so good. So I think it can be scary to put yourself out there and to ask for your needs, especially if that's not something that you were taught or that feels familiar to you.
Yeah. And if a boundary in your head could potentially cut off the feelings that are so positive, it also makes sense that you wouldn't want to try it. But, I also think a little bit earlier, you touched upon the fact that, if you're at a vulnerable stage in your life, you also might think, this is my last chance.
Yes.
And like, does that feed into it?
Yes, yes, yes. It is very, very hard to date right now. And I think more and more as time goes on, for all the reasons that we could talk about on another podcast, it's hard to find genuine, long-standing relationships. So I think especially for people who are getting older that want to build families and, want to have their kind of dream life, it could be really, really hard to step away from a relationship that feels unhealthy, especially even when there are these moments that are good. The relationship in entirety may not be great at all, but if there are these moments that feel intoxicating and you could post what this person's doing for you on social media, sometimes that feels worth it. And you might be like, oh, am I ever going to get this kind of love again? Again, even if it's not the healthy love. So I do think that that has a lot to do with it too.
And you mentioning social media also really, I think, is an interesting part of this because I do think there is an element also of love bombing specifically for the internet. There's people I know who would do these over the top, lavish things for their partners and then expect them to post it on social media and be like, "No, you're not going to show like what I did for you? Like, aren't you gonna?" And I also feel that is difficult and plays into this too of people being like, "Oh, but see, they were experiencing this super over the top gesture. Maybe like what I'm experiencing is normal." And like, do you know like is there like also an element of that that could play into it because everything's so grandiose on social media?
I do think so. I absolutely think so. We are certainly in this culture where, in this like influencer era as well, where people want to sort of show off their lifestyle or show off how great their lives are or how great their relationship is. And there's constant comparison that's happening. And so, yes, I think that for people who use abuse and are kind of cunning and clever, they might do these grandiose things because they know, oop, you can show your friends or you can post it on your stories and you'll gain a lot of clout for that. And I think for people who are experiencing abuse or experiencing love bombing, it feels good. Look at the way that someone's loved me. No one's ever done this for me. This is such a new thing. So I unfortunately, not to kind of berate social media, but I think that that's played a large part in why even in why people feel confused about what love bombing looks like. Because I'll say one quick thing when I was like, knowing that we were going to do this podcast, I was looking at Instagram and TikTok and I was looking at what people were saying about it. And in the comments, people were like, but are you sure? Like, this happened to me. So, I don't know. That doesn't sound like that situation. And they would still have questions. So I think I just think social media makes it really, really hard.
Yeah, and I would love to know if you remember any of those questions that they had or things that stuck out to you that you thought, ooh, like I wish I could comment on that or respond to that. Is there anything that stuck out to you?
Yeah, I can't remember super specifically, but there were a couple of people. There's this creator, her name is Tasia on Instagram and TikTok. I love her. And she made a video about love bombing and how to like test someone. And in the comments, I think there were a couple of people who talked about their own experience and they were like, but we were together for like 4 years, or like we were I don't think it was quite love bombing because when I asked him to stop, he stopped at this moment. Or when I asked him, to take me on a date, he took me on a date. So nothing super specific, but I have noticed that people still get hung up on this idea of like, but are you sure that's what it is? Because I really don't want an excuse to walk away from this experience that I'm having.
Right, and maybe it's not so black and white. Like just because it's almost like if you take it with like an abusive relationship, it's like Robin Hughes, who's our crisis response team manager, always says it's not 100% bad all the time because nobody would ever stay in an abusive relationship if it was always bad. So even if there is some respect for your boundary once, or they are doing something in a certain way, it's like that dialectics, right? It could be that, sure, they're treating you well now, but also they've been controlling and abusing you for a long time. And it's not necessarily like, I think sometimes people think of it as like a checklist and it's like, oh, but they were nice once, so it couldn't possibly be that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. And I think even if things feel really good for a period of time, and even if someone is nice and lovely and gives you a great gift or takes you on a great trip once, if they are flipping the switch, kind of Jekyll and Hyde, and if they are doing things that test your boundaries and that make you feel uncomfortable and happen without your consent, that's still sort of to me characterized as an unhealthy relationship. And I would hope that there would be someone out there who can be healthy all of the time and where you can have more of those feel good feelings. Not to say you won't have disagreements or people will, not test your boundaries, but I think it's really, really hard for people to recognize that there can be healthy love that exists outside of what you're experiencing in this moment.
Yeah, no, that is so important because it is also when you're experiencing abuse, an unhealthy relationship goes hand in hand with isolation, right? Like it's supposed to be this is normal, this is how everyone is treated, and by isolating someone, you also can't see outside of it. So I think to your point, you know, you have all this information coming in, and then if you're isolated, you think, oh, I mean, everybody's relationship started like this, and maybe it is a natural ebb and flow, and you start to kind of make these excuses and ways to not think it's happening, and I think that's very natural.
Mm-hmm. It's very natural, and in many cases, love bombing is people who engage in love bombing are trying to isolate you away from your friends and family. So if you are isolated, chances are it was also designed that way. So I would say, not to necessarily take accountability for all the things that are happening that are wrong in your relationship. A lot of that was designed to do that to you. And that's why it's so important to check in with friends and keep open communications and have support in different places to ask questions when things don't feel so great if you can, and sometimes you can't even do that.
Yeah. And that's why, like, if you could get resources, though, the outside perspectives really help you realize what's happening and that these things aren't normal. And nobody deserves abuse and nobody deserves to be put through these emotions. But there is one thing else that I kind of wanted to circle back to is that you had said the response on social media, sometimes the way that people react to love bombing. There was one that I came across once where it was like a Reddit post, I think, or something like that, where somebody said somebody was love bombing them because they really liked this TV show. And then the guy that they first met watched the TV show so he could talk to her about it. And she was like, that's love bombing. Like, that's so extreme. Like, why would he ever do that? And I thought that that was a very interesting part of it as well, is taking when is it, oh, like, oh, you really like rug tufting. Like, I'm gonna look into that so we can talk about it. Versus when are you love bombing? Like when so I think that I thought that was a very fascinating element where people were maybe over prescribing it and it was just a natural kind of thing that you do in relationship. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Right, right, right. It makes me wonder what kind of life experiences that person had. I think sometimes because of trauma, a lot of times because of trauma, people have a hypersensitivity to these things. And maybe they've had an experience before where they did experience abuse. So things that could even feel normal, like, you know, thinking about my sister and her boyfriend. My sister was very fit and like loves to work out and do Soul Cycle, and her boyfriend hadn't worked out in a while, and he started picking up Soul Cycle too, but did it to spend time with her, but also to get fit and also to show interest in her. But it was a very sort of normal relational thing to do. So I think for some people, it's really hard to be able to detect that. But to our point at the beginning of the podcast, I think it's what does it all look like in totality? If it's an isolated behavior where, it's healthy and you don't feel like your boundary is super encroached upon, maybe you checked with a friend and asked, then I'd say, okay, let's wait and see things out. But if it's all love bombing is a pattern of things. It's typically not just one thing. It's a lots of different forms of things. Again, gifts, verbal expression, promises, future faking. So that's how I would kind of distinguish the love bombing.
Yeah, and I also think it's how it makes you feel too, because if, somebody knows that you really like donuts and picks you up a donut, like is that necessarily love bombing? And will they keep picking you up a donut even if you had a tone with them in the morning? Like I think that going back to consistency, going back to how it's or if it's used in a manner to get you to comply or behave a certain way, I also think is kind of a sign that, oh, like, maybe something's wrong, rather than just like, oh, like, I am filling the ice tray because I know you don't like to. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that.
Yes, yes. And I'd add on the two things I said at the beginning, like intent and intensity. Intent, intensity, and speed. So really, really keeping an eye out for how fast things are, how intense things are to me. Someone taking up a hobby that they know you like in order to show you that they're invested. Is that necessarily intense? Not necessarily. How often is it happening in the relationship and what was their intent behind it?
Right. Like if, for instance, if they know you really like yoga and you like to be alone doing yoga, and then all of a sudden they have to go to every yoga session you have, that's different.
I actually applaud these conversations a lot. Like, I am super happy that that person posted that on Reddit. And I think if you have a question and you need advice, even if it's from the internet, if that's your only big resource, ask it. Because I'm glad that we're having these conversations and I'm glad that people are able to weigh in and see different opinions and different perspectives from their own.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your expertise with our audience. You're always a delight to have. Please remember that love bombing is something that could happen to anyone, regardless of age, and that help is always available if you are in an unhealthy relationship. Please tune in to the next episode of Unsilenced because education is the first step in ending domestic violence. Thank you for listening to this episode of Unsilenced, Real Conversations About Abuse. This podcast is produced by JBWS, a domestic violence agency serving Morris County, New Jersey. Please let us know what topics you would like covered on this podcast by sending an email to podcast@jbws.org. Please note that this email address is only intended for content relating to the podcast. It is not meant to offer immediate assistance or access to services. If you live or work in Morris County and think you might be in an unhealthy relationship, JBWS is here to help. Please visit our website at jbws.org to learn more about our services or call our 24-hour helpline to speak to members of our staff at 1-877-782-2873. If you recognize controlling or abusive behaviors in yourself, JBWS can also help change those behaviors. Through our Jersey Center for Nonviolence, JBWS offers programs for men, women, and adolescent males who have used abusive or controlling behaviors in their relationships. Please visit jbws.org/JCNV or call 973-539-7801 to learn more. If you don't live in Morris County, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Domestic violence grows in silence, so thank you so much for listening and helping us break through that silence through these types of conversations. Please follow us on social media and continue to share our content to get as many people talking about domestic abuse as possible.